Man and His Becoming, according to the Vedanta, by Rene, Guenon, read by Christopher Robert Neal Nation. Chapter 11. The Different Conditions of Atma in the Human Being. We will now enter upon a more detailed study of the different conditions of the individual being residing in the living form, which, as previously explained, includes the subtle form on the one hand and the gross or bodily form on the other. The conditions we are referring to must not be confused with the particular condition which we have already noted as being special to each individual, distinguishing him from all other individuals, nor are they connected with what they aggregate of limiting conditions defining each state of existence taken separately. In this instance, we are referring exclusively to the various states, or, if it be preferred, the various modalities to which, in a perfectly general way, any single individual being is subject, whatever the nature of that being may be. These modalities, taken as a whole, can always be related both to the gross and to the subtle state, the former being confined to the bodily modality, and the latter comprising the remainder of the individuality. There is no question here of the other individual states, since it is the human state in particular that we are considering. What is beyond these two states no longer belongs to the individual as such. We are referring to what may be called the causal state, that is to say, the state which corresponds to Karana Shariya, and which belongs consequently to the universal and formless order. With this causal state, moreover, though we are no longer in the realm of individual existence, we are still in the realm of being. Therefore, we also need to envisage, beyond being, a fourth, absolutely unconditioned principial state. Metaphysically, all these states, even those which belong strictly to the individual, are related to Atma. That is to say, to the personality, since it is this alone which constitutes the fundamental reality of the being, and since every state of that being would be purely illusory if one attempted to separate it from Atma. The being's different states, whatever their nature, represent nothing but possibilities of Atma. That is why it is possible to speak of the various conditions in which the being finds itself as in the truest sense conditions of Atma. Although it must be clearly understood that Atma in itself is in no way affected thereby, and does not on that account cease to be unconditioned, in the same way that it never becomes manifested, although it is the essential and transcendent principle of manifestation in all its modes. Disregarding for the moment the fourth state, to which we shall return later, the first three states are the waking state, corresponding to gross manifestation, the dream state, corresponding to subtle manifestation, and deep sleep, which is the causal and formless state. Besides these three states, another is sometimes mentioned, that of death, and even a further one, the state of ecstatic trance, considered as intermediate. Sandhya, note 1. The word sandhya, derived from sandhi, the point of contact or of junction between two things, is also used, in a more ordinary sense, to describe the twilight, morning and evening, similarly considered an intermediate between day and night. In the theory of cosmic cycles, it indicates the interval between two yugas. The state of ecstatic trance, considered as intermediate sandhya between deep sleep and death, in the same way the dreaming is intermediate between waking and deep sleep. These two last states, however, are not generally reckoned as separate, since they are not essentially distinct from that of deep sleep, which is really an extra individual state, as we have just explained, and in which the being returns likewise into non-manifestation, or at least into the formless. The living soul, Jivatma, withdrawing into the bosom of universal spirit, Atma, along the path which leads to the very center of being, where is the seat of Brahma. For the detailed description of these states, we have only to turn to the text of the Mandukya Upanishad, the opening passage of which we have already cited, with the exception of one phrase. However, the first of all, which runs, this syllable, akshara, note 4, the word akshara etymologically means indissoluble or indestructible. If the syllable is referred to by means of this word, this is because the syllable, and not the alphabetical letter, is looked upon as constituting the primitive unit and fundamental element of language. Moreover, every verbal root is syllabic. A verbal root in Sanskrit is called dhatu, a word properly meaning seed, because though the possibilities of multiple modifications, through the possibilities of multiple modification that it carries and contains in itself, it is indeed the seed which, by its development, gives birth to the entire language. It may be said that the root is the fixed and invariable element in a word, representing its fundamental and immutable nature, to which secondary, invariable elements come to be added, representing accidents in the etymological sense, or modifications of the principal idea. This syllable is everything that is. Its explanation follows. The sacred monosyllable, which expresses the essence of the Veda, is here taken as the ideographic symbol of Atma. This syllable, composed of 3 letters, matras, these letters being A, U, and M, the first 2 contracting into O. Note 6. In Sanskrit, the vowel O is actually formed from the combination of A and U, just as the vowel E is formed from the union of A and I. Likewise, in Arabic, the 3 vowels A, I, and U are the only ones that are considered fundamental and really distinct. The first 2 contracting into O has 4 elements, the fourth of which, being none other than the monosyllable itself, regarded synthetically under its principial aspect, is non-expressed by any letter, being prior to all distinction in the indissoluble. Similarly, Atma has 4 conditions, the fourth of which is not really a special condition at all, but is Atma regarded in itself, in an absolutely transcendent manner, independently of any condition, and which, as such, is not susceptible of any representation. We will now go on to explain what the text we referred to says on the subject of each of these conditions of Atma, starting from the last degree, that of manifestation, and working back to the supreme, total, and unconditioned state. Man and His Becoming, according to the Vedanta, by Rene Guenon. Read by Christopher Robert Neal Nation. Chapter 12. The Waking State, or the condition of Vishvanara. The first condition is Vishvanara, the seat of which is in the waking state. Note 1. It is obvious that this and all similar expressions, such as abode, residence, etc., must always be understood in this context symbolically and not literally. That is to say, they must be taken as indicating not a place, but rather a modality of existence. The use of a spatial symbolism is moreover extremely widespread, a fact which can be accounted for by the actual nature of the conditions governing corporal individuality, and which dictate the terms in which any translation of the truths that concern other states of the being must necessarily be expressed, insofar as such expression is possible. The term sthana has as its exact equivalent the word state or status, for the root stha reappears in the Latin stare and its derivatives. with the same meaning as in Sanskrit. Again, the first condition is Vaishvanara, the seat, of which is the waking state, which has knowledge of external, sensible objects, and which has 7 members and 19 mouths, and the world of gross manifestation for its province. Vaishvanara, as the etymological derivation of the word indicates, is what we have called universal man. Note 3. On this derivation, see Shankaracharya's commentary on the Brahma Sutras 1.2.28. It is Atma who is both all, Vishva, when he appears as the personality, and man, Nara, when he appears as the individuality, that is to say, as Jivatma. Vaishvanara is therefore a title which is properly befitting to Atma. On the other hand, it is also a name of Agni, as we shall see further on. Vaishvanara, as the etymological derivation of the word indicates, is what we have called universal man, regarded, however, more especially in the complete development of his states of manifestation and under the particular aspect of that development. Here, the extent of this term appears to be limited to one of these states only, the most external of all, that of gross manifestation, which constitutes the corporal world. But this particular state can be taken as the symbol for the whole of universal manifestation, of which it is an element, since for the human being it is necessarily the basis and point of departure for all realization. As in all symbolism, therefore, it will suffice to effect the transposition appropriate to the degree to which the conception is called upon to apply. It is in this sense that the state in question can be related to universal man, and described as constituting his body, conceived by analogy with the body of individual man, an analogy which is that of the macrocosm and the microcosm, as we have already explained. Under this aspect, Vaishvanara is also identified with Viraj, that is to say, with the cosmic intelligence, insofar as it governs and unifies in its integrality the whole of the corporal world. Finally, from another point of view, which however corroborates the preceding one, Vaishvanara also means that which is common to all men. In that case, it is the human species, understood as specific nature, or more exactly, what may be called the genius of the species. Note 4. In this connection, Nara, or Niri, is man, considered as an individual belonging to the human species, whereas Manava is more exactly man in his capacity as a thinking being. That is to say, as being endowed with the mental faculty, which is moreover the essential attribute inherent to his species, and the one by which the nature of this species is characterized. On the other hand, the name Nara is nonetheless capable of being transposed analogically so as to be identified with Purusha, and thus it comes about that Vishnu is sometimes referred to as Narottama, or Supreme Man, a name which must not be taken as implying the least trace of anthropomorphism, any more than the conception of universal man under all its aspects. And this is true precisely in virtue of this transposition. We cannot here undertake an investigation of the manifold and complex meanings implied in the word Nara. As for the nature of the species, a whole special study would be needed to deal adequately with the development to which it may give rise. Furthermore, it should be observed that the corporal state is in fact common to all human individuals, whatever may be the other modalities in which they are capable of developing themselves in order to realize as individuals and without going beyond the human level the full range of their respective possibilities. Note 5. It would be illuminating to establish points of concordance with the conception of Adamic nature in the Jewish and Islamic traditions, a conception which likewise is applicable at different levels and in hierarchically superposed meanings. But this would lead us too far afield, and at the moment we must limit ourselves to this bare reference. After what has just been said, it will be easy for us to explain the significance of the seven members mentioned in the Mandukya Upanishad, and which form the seven principal parts of the macrocosmic body of Vaishvanara, taking them in order. 1. The assemblage of the higher luminous spheres, that is to say, of the higher states of being, considered, however, in this instance solely in their relationship with the particular state in question, is compared with the part of the head containing the brain, for the brain in fact corresponds organically with the mental function, which is but a reflection of the intelligible light, or of the supra-individual principles. 2. The sun and the moon are more exactly the principles represented in the sensible world by these two luminaries. Note 6. Here one might recall the symbolical meanings which the sun and moon bear in the Western Hermetic tradition, and in the cosmological theories that the alchemists based on it. In neither case must the designation of these heavenly bodies be taken literally. It should also be observed that the present symbolism differs from that previously alluded to, according to which the sun and the moon correspond respectively to the heart and the brain. Here again, long explanations would be necessary in order to show how these different points of view are reconciled and harmonized in the whole framework of analogical correspondences. In the sensible world, by these two luminaries are the two eyes. 3. Once again, 2. The sun and the moon are more exactly the principles represented in the sensible world by these two luminaries are the two eyes. 3. The igneous principle is the mouth. Note 7. We have already mentioned that Vishvanara is occasionally a name of Agni, who is then chiefly considered in the guise of animating warmth. Therefore, in the form in which he is dwelling in living things. We shall have occasion to refer to this again at a later stage. Furthermore, Mukhya Prana is both the breath of the mouth, Mukhya, and the principal vital act. It is in the latter sense that the 5 Vayus are its modalities, and warmth is intimately associated with life itself. 4. The direction of space, dish, are the ears. Note 8. One may notice the remarkable relationship between this symbolism and the physiological function of the semicircular canals. 5. 5. The atmosphere, that is to say, the cosmic environment whence the vital breath, prana, proceeds, corresponds to the lungs. 6. The intermediate region, extending between the earth and the luminous spheres, are heavens, and considered as the region where form, still potential in relation to the gross state, are elaborated, corresponds to the stomach. Note 9. In one sense, the word antariksha also includes the atmosphere, which is then considered as the medium of diffusion of light. It is also worth noting that the agent of that diffusion is not air, vayu, but ether, akasha. When the terms are transposed in order to make them applicable to the entirety of the states of universal manifestation, antariksha is identified with bhuvas, the middle term of tribhuvana, which is ordinarily described as the atmosphere. The word being taken, however, is a much more extended and less determinate sense than in the preceding case. The name of the 3 worlds, Bhu, Bhuvas, and Var, are the 3 Varitas, words which are usually uttered after the monosyllable in the Hindu rites of Sadhya Upasana, a meditation repeated in the morning, at midday, and in the evening. It is noticeable that the first 2 of the 3 names derive from the same root, because they refer to modalities of the same state of existence, namely that of the human individuality, while the third represents in this division the whole of the higher states. 7. And finally the earth, that is to say, symbolically, the final term and actuation of the entire corporal manifestation. And finally, the earth, that is to say, symbolically, the final term and actuation of the entire corporal manifestation, corresponding to the feet, which are taken here as the emblem of the whole lower portion of the body. The relationship of these various members to one another and their functions in the cosmic whole to which they belong is analogous but not identical, be it understood, with the relationship between the corresponding parts of the human organism. It will be noticed that no mention is made here of the heart because its direct relationship with the universal intelligence places it outside the sphere of the individual functions properly so called, and because the seat of Brahma is really and truly the central point both in the cosmic and in the human orders. Whereas everything pertaining to manifestation, and above all to formal manifestation, is external and peripheric, if one may so express it, belonging exclusively to the circumference of the wheel of things. In condition, in the condition we are describing, Atma, as Vaishvanara, becomes conscious of the world of sensible manifestation, considered also as the sphere of that aspect of the non-supreme Brahma, which is called Viraj. It does so by means of 19 organs, which are described as so many mouths, because they are entranceways of knowledge for everything belonging to this particular domain. Moreover, the intellectual assimilation which operates in knowledge is often compared symbolically with the vital assimilation effected by nutrition. These 19 organs, also including in that term the corresponding faculties, in accordance with our previous explanation of the general significance of the word indriya, are the 5 organs of sensation, the 5 organs of action, the 5 vital breaths, the mental faculty or inward sense, the intellect, buddhi, considered here exclusively in its relationship to the individual state, thought, conceived as the faculty which gives form to ideas and which associates them with another, and finally, individual consciousness. These are the faculties which we have already studied in detail. Each organ and each faculty of every individual belonging to the domain in question, that is to say, to the corporal world, proceeds respectively from its corresponding organ or faculty in Vaishvanara. Of this organ and faculty, it is, in a certain sense, one of the constituent elements, in the same way that the individual to which it belongs is an element of the cosmic whole, in which, for its part, and in the place allotted to it, from the fact that it is that individual being and not another, it contributes of necessity toward making up the total harmony. Note 10. This harmony is also an aspect of Dharma. It is the equilibrium in which all disequilibriums are compensated, the order which is made up of the sum of all partial and apparent disorders. The waking state in which the activity of the organs and faculties in question is exercised, is described as the first of the conditions of Atma, although the gross or corporal modality to which it corresponds occupies the lowest degree in the order of development of manifestation. Starting from its primordial and unmanifested principle, it marks indeed the limit of the development, at least in relation to the state of existence in which human individuality is situated. The reason for this apparent anomaly has already been explained. It is in this corporal modality that we find the basis and point of departure, firstly, of individual realization. That is to say, of the full realization of the individuality in its integral extension, and afterwards of all further realization, which lies beyond the individual possibilities and implies the taking possession by the being of its higher states. Consequently, if, instead of placing oneself at the point of view of the development of manifestation, one places oneself, as we are doing at present, at the point of view of this realization with its various degrees, the order of which necessarily proceeds in the contrary direction, from the manifested to the unmanifested, then in that case the waking state must clearly be looked upon as in fact preceding the states of dreaming and deep sleep, which correspond respectively to the extracorporeal modalities of the individuality and to the supra-individual states of the being. Man and His Becoming According to the Vedanta by Rene Guenon, read by Christopher Robert Neal Nation. Chapter 13, The Dream State, or Condition of Tajasa. The second condition is Tajasa, the luminous, a word derived from Tejas, the igneous element, whose seat is in the dream state, which has knowledge of inward mental objects, which has 7 members and 19 mouths, and whose domain in the world of subtle manifestation, and whose domain is the world of subtle manifestation. Note 1. Mandukya Upanishad 1.4. In this text, the subtle state is called pravitikta, literally pre-distinguished, because it is a state of distinction that precedes gross manifestation. The word also means separate, because the living soul, when in the dream state, is to all intents confined within itself, contrary to what happens in the waking state, which is common to all men. In this state, the outward faculties, while existing all the time potentially, are reabsorbed into the inward sense, which is at the same time their common source, their support, and their immediate end, and which resides in the luminous arteries, nadis, of the subtle form, where it is distributed without any division of its nature in the manner of a diffused heat. The igneous element in itself, considered in its essential properties, is indeed at one and the same time light and heat. And, as the very name Tajasa applied to the subtle state indicates, these two aspects, subtly transposed, since there is no longer any question here of sensible qualities, must be found in that state also, as we have already had occasion to remark elsewhere. Everything belonging to the subtle state is very closely connected with the nature of life itself, which is inseparable from heat, and it may be recalled that on this point, as on many others, the conceptions of Aristotle are in complete agreement with those of the East. As for the luminosity to which we have just alluded, it should be regarded as the reflection and diffraction of the intelligible light in the extrasensible modalities of formal manifestation, among which, however, it is only necessary in the present instance to consider those relating to the human state. Furthermore, the subtle form itself, in which Tajasa dwells, is likened to a fiery vehicle. Note 2. Elsewhere in this connotation, we have recalled the chariot of fire upon which the prophet Elijah was taken up to heaven. 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 2. Although this must of course be distinguished from corporal fire, the element tejas, or that which derives from it, which is perceived by the senses of the gross form. Vehicle of Vishvanara, and more particularly by sight, since visibility, necessarily presupposing the presence of light, is the sensible quality naturally belonging to tejas in the subtle state. However, there can no longer be any question of bhutas, but only the corresponding tanmatras, which are their immediate determining principle. As to the nadis, or arteries belonging to the subtle form, they should on no account be confused with the corporal arteries by means of which the circulation of blood is effected. Physiologically, they correspond rather to the ramifications of the nervous system, for they are expressly described as luminous. Moreover, just as fire is in a sense polarized into heat and light, so the subtle state is linked to the corporal state in two different and complementary ways: through the blood as to the caloric, and through the nervous system as to the luminous quality. Note 3. We have already mentioned in describing the constitution of the Annamaya Kosha, which is the bodily organism, that the elements of the nervous system originate from the assimilation of fiery substances. As for blood being liquid, it is formed originally from watery substances, but these must have undergone an elaboration due to the action of the vital heat, which is the manifestation of Agni Vishvanara, and they only play the part of a plastic support that serves for the fixation of an element of igneous nature. Fire and water here represent, in relation to one another, essence and substance, in a relative sense. One might easily compare this with certain alchemical theories, such as those which introduce the principles called sulfur and mercury, the one active and the other passive, which are respectively analogous in the order of mixed things to fire and water in the order of elements, not to mention the many other designations that are conferred symbolically in the Hermetic language on the two correlative terms of a duality of this nature. At the same time, it must be clearly understood that between the nadis and the nerves, there is correspondence only and not identification, since the former are not corporal and we are really concerned with two different spheres within the integral individuality. Similarly, when a relationship is established between the functions of these nadis and respiration, because respiration is essential for maintaining life and corresponds in a real way to the principal vital act, it should not be concluded on that account that they can be represented as canals of some sort in which the air circulates. Note 4. We are alluding here more especially to the teachings connected with Hatha Yoga, that is to say, the methods preparatory to union. Yoga is, in the proper sense of the word, which are based on the assimilation of certain rhythms, chiefly bound up with breath control, what the Islamic esoteric schools call dhikr, fulfills exactly the same function, and often, indeed, the actual proceedings resorted to are quite similar in both traditions. A fact, however, which is not to be taken as evidence of any borrowing. The science of rhythm, in fact, may well be known in two different quarters quite independently, for we are dealing here with a science having its own definite object and corresponding to a clearly defined order of reality, although this science is quite unknown to Westerners. This would amount to confusing the vital breath, prana, which properly belongs to the order of subtle manifestation, with a bodily function. It is sometimes said that the total number of nadis is 72,000. According to other texts, however, it is given as 720 million. But the difference here is more apparent than real, since these numbers are meant to be taken symbolically and not literally, as is usual in such cases, and this will be apparent if one observes their obvious connection with the cyclic numbers. Note 6. The fundamental cyclic numbers are 72 equals 2 cubed by 3 squared, 108 equals 2 squared by 3 cubed, 432 equals 2 to the fourth power by 3 cubed, equals 72 times 6, equals 108 times 4. They apply, for example, to the geometrical divisions of a circle. 360 equals 72 times 5, equals 12 times 30. And to the duration of the astronomical period of the precession of the equinoxes. 72 times 360 equals 432 times 60 equals 25,920 years. These are their most immediate and elementary applications. But we cannot enter at present into the properly symbolical considerations that arise out of the transposition of these data into different orders. Further on, we shall have occasion to supplement our remarks upon the subject of the subtle arteries, as well as on the different stages in the process of reabsorption of the individual faculties. As we have said, this reabsorption is effected in an order inverse to the development of those same faculties. In the dream state, the individual living soul, Jivatma, is to itself its own light, and it produces, through the action of its own desire, Kama, alone, a world issuing entirely from itself, in which the objects consist exclusively of mental conceptions, that is to say, of combinations of ideas, clothed in subtle forms, depending substantially upon the subtle form of the individual himself, of which they are merely so many secondary and accidental modifications. There is, however, always something incomplete and uncoordinated about this production. It is for this reason that it is looked upon as illusory, or as only possessing an apparent existence, whereas, in the sensible world, where it is situated in the waking state, the same living soul possesses the faculty of acting in the sense of a practical production. Also illusory, no doubt, with regard to absolute reality, and transitory like all manifestation, yet nevertheless possessing a relative reality and a stability sufficient for the needs of ordinary profane life. Lokika, a word derived from loka, the world, which should here be taken in a sense exactly equivalent to that which it normally bears in the Gospels. However, it is important to observe that this difference respecting the orientation of the activity of the being in the two states does not imply an effective superiority of the waking state over the dream state when each is considered in itself, or at least a superiority which is valid only from a profane point of view, cannot metaphysically be considered as a real superiority. And indeed, from another point of view, the possibilities of the dream state are more extensive than those of the waking state, since they allow the individual to escape, in a certain measure, from all of the limiting conditions to which he is subject in the corporal modality. But however that may be, the absolutely real is the self, Atma, alone. It is utterly unattainable by any conception that confines itself to the consideration of external and internal objects, knowledge of which consists respectively the waking and dream states. Certain heterodox schools, which did in fact restrict their attention in this way to the aggregate of these two states, thereby condemned themselves to remain wholly enclosed within the limits of formal manifestation and the human individuality. By reason of its connection with the mental faculty, the realm of subtle manifestation can be described as an ideal world. To distinguish it from the sensible world, which is the realm of gross manifestation. This term, however, should not be taken in the sense of Plato's intelligible world, since his ideas are possibilities in the principal state, which must be referred to formless being, in spite of the over-imaginative expressions in which Plato often enveloped his thoughts. In the subtle state, we are still only concerned with ideas clothed in forms, since the possibilities which this state comprises do not extend beyond individual existence. Note 9. The subtle state is properly the realm of and not that of, the latter in reality corresponding to buddhi, that is to say, the super-individual intellect. Above all, it is important not to be misled into imagining an opposition here of the kind which certain modern philosophers claim to establish between ideal and real. Such an opposition is really quite meaningless. Everything that is, under whatever mode it may happen to exist, is real for that very reason and possesses precisely the type and degree of reality consonant with its own nature. Something consisting in ideas, and that is all the meaning properly attributable to the word ideal, is neither more nor less real on that account than something consisting in anything else, each possibility necessarily finding its position at that level in the universal hierarchy determined for it by its own nature. In the order of universal manifestation, just as the sensible world in its entirety is identified with Viraj, so this ideal world of which we have been speaking is identified with Hiranyagarbha, literally the golden embryo. Note 10. The name bears a meaning very close to that of Tajasa, for gold, according to the Hindu doctrine, is the mineral light. The alchemists also looked on it as corresponding by analogy among the metals, the sun among the planets, and it is at least a remarkable fact that the Latin name for gold itself, aurum, is strikingly similar to the Hebrew aor, which means light. In the order of universal manifestation, just as the sensible world is in its entirety is identified with Viraj, so this ideal world of which we have been speaking is identified with Hiranyagarbha, literally the golden embryo, which is Brahma, the termination of Brahma as effect, Kairya, enveloping himself in the world egg, Brahmanda, out of which there will develop, according to its mode of realization, the whole formal manifestation which is contained therein, virtually as a conception of this Hiranyagarbha, primordial germ of the cosmic light. Notes 11 and 12. It must be pointed out that Brahma is a masculine form, while Brahma is neuter. This indispensable distinction, which is of the highest importance, since it expresses the distinction of the supreme form from the non-supreme form, cannot be indicated if, as is usual among Orientalists, one employs a single form of Brahman, which belongs to either gender. The latter practice leads to perpetual confusion, especially in a language like French, where the neuter gender is wanting. This cosmogonic symbol of the world egg is in no wise peculiar to India. It is, for example, to be found in Mazdaism, in the Egyptian tradition, the egg of Kenneth, in that of the Druids, and in the Orphic tradition. The embryonic condition, which in each individual being plays a corresponding part to that played by Brahmanda in the cosmic order, is in Sanskrit called Pinda, and the analogy between the microcosm and the macrocosm, considered under this aspect, is expressed in the following formula. Yatha Pinda Tata Brahmanda, as the individual embryo, so the world egg. Furthermore, Hiranyagarbha is described as the synthetic aggregate of life, Jiva Gana. Indeed, it can really be identified with universal life, by reason of the previously mentioned connection between the subtle state and life, which, even when considered in its entire extension, and not limited to organic or corporal life only, to which field the physiological point of view is restricted, is nonetheless but one of the special conditions of that state of existence to which human individuality belongs. The sphere of life, therefore, does not extend beyond the possibilities comprised within that state, which, be it understood, should here be viewed integrally and taken as including the subtle modalities as well as the gross modalities. Whether one places oneself at the macrocosmic point of view, as we have just done, or at the microcosmic point of view, which we adopted to begin with, the ideal world in question is conceived by faculties corresponding analogically to those by which the sensible world is perceived, or if it be preferred, which are the same faculties as these in principle, since they are still individual faculties, but considered under another mode of existence and at another degree of development, their activity being exercised in a different realm. This explains how Atma, in this dream state, that is to say, under the aspect of Tejasa, comes to have the same number of members and mouths, or instruments of knowledge, as in the waking state under the aspect of Vaishvanara. There is no necessity to enumerate them a second time, since the definitions we have already given can be applied equally by means of a subtle transposition to the two realms of gross or sensible manifestation and subtle or ideal manifestation. Man and His Becoming According to the Vedanta by Rene Guenon. Read by Christopher Robert Neal Nation. Chapter 14. The State of Deep Sleep, or Condition of Prajna. When the being who is asleep experiences no desire and is not the subject of any dream, his state is that of deep sleep. He that is to say, Atma itself in this condition, who in this state has become one without any distinction or differentiation, who has identified himself with a synthetic whole, unique and without particular determination of integral knowledge, who is filled by inmost penetration and assimilation with beatitude, actually enjoying that beatitude, Ananda as his own realm, in whose mouth the instrument of knowledge is exclusively total consciousness itself, without intermediary or particularization of any sort, that one is called prajna, he who knows above and beyond any special condition. This is the third condition. Notes 1 and 2. Taoism likewise declares all is one. During sleep, the undistracted soul is absorbed into this unity. In the waking state, being distracted, it distinguishes diverse beings. To concentrate all one's intellectual energy, as it were, in one's masses is another expression of the Taoist doctrine bearing the same meaning. Prajnana, or integral knowledge, is here opposed to vijnana, or distinctive knowledge, which, being specially applicable to the individual or formal realm, characterizes the two preceding states. In the first of the envelopes in which Atma is clothed, or entering the world of names and forms, that is to say, when manifesting itself as Jivatma. As will at once be apparent, the vehicle of Atma in this state is the Karana Sharira. Since this is Anandamaya Kosha, and although it is spoken of analogically as a vehicle or an envelope, it is not really something distinct from Atma itself, since here we are beyond the sphere of distinction. Beatitude is made up of all the possibilities of Atma. It is, one might say, the sum itself of these possibilities. And if Atma, or Prajna, enjoys this beatitude as its rightful kingdom, that is because it is really nothing else than the plenitude of its being, as we have already pointed out. This is essentially a formless and supra-individual state. It cannot therefore have anything to do with a psychic or psychological state, as certain Orientalists have supposed. The psychic, properly speaking, is in fact the subtle state. And in making this assimilation, we take the word psychic in its primitive sense as used by the ancients, without concerning ourselves with the various far more specialized meanings which have been attached to it in the later times, whereby it cannot be made to apply even to the whole of the subtle state. As for modern Western psychology, it deals only with a quite restricted portion of the human individuality, where the mental faculty is in direct relationship with the corporal modality, and given the methods it employs, it is incapable of going any further. In any case, the very objective which it sets before itself, and which is exclusively the study of mental phenomena, limits it strictly to the realm of the individuality, so that the state which we are now discussing necessarily eludes its investigations. Indeed, it might even be said that the state is doubly inaccessible to it, in the first place because it lies beyond the mental sphere, or the sphere of discursive and differentiated thought, and in the second place because it lies equally beyond all phenomena of any kind, and that is to say, beyond all formal manifestation. This state of indifferentiation, in which all knowledge, including that of the other states, is synthetically centralized in the essential and fundamental unity of the being, is the unmanifested and non-developed state, principle and cause of the manifestation, and the source from which manifestation is developed in the multiplicity of its different states, and more particularly as concerns the human being, in its subtle and gross states. The unmanifested state, conceived as root of the manifested, which is only its effect, is identified in this respect with Mula Prakriti, primordial nature. But in reality, it is Purusha as well as Prakriti, containing them both in its own indifferentiation, for it is cause in the complete sense of the word. That is to say, both at one and the same time efficient cause and material cause, to use the ordinary terminology, to which, however, we must prefer the expression essential cause and substantial cause, since these two complementary aspects of causality do in fact relate respectively to essence and to substance, in the sense we have previously given to these words. If Atma in this third state is thus beyond the distinction of Purusha and Prakriti, or of the two poles of manifestation, that is simply because it is no longer situated within conditioned existence, but actually at the level of pure being. Nevertheless, Purusha and Prakriti, which are themselves still unmanifested, should be included within it, and this is even in a sense true, as we shall see later on, of the formless states of manifestation as well, which it has already been necessary to attach to the universal, since they are really supra-individual states of the being. Moreover, it has to be remembered that all manifested states are contained synthetically and in principle within unmanifested being. In this state, the different objects of manifestation, including those of individual manifestation, external as well as internal, are not destroyed, but subsist in principial mode, being unified by the very fact that they are no longer conceived under the secondary or contingent aspect of distinction. Of necessity, they find themselves among the possibilities of the self, and the latter remains conscious in itself of all these possibilities, as non-distinctively beheld in the integral knowledge, from the very fact of being conscious of its own permanence in the eternal present. Note 4. It is this which allows of the transposition in a metaphysical sense of the theological doctrine of the resurrection of the dead, as well as the conception of the glorious body. The latter, moreover, is not a body in the proper sense of the word, but its transformation or transfiguration, that is to say, its transposition outside form, and the other conditions of individual existence. In other words, it is the realization of the permanent an immutable possibility of which the body is but a transient expression in manifested mode. Were it otherwise, and were the objects of manifestation not thus to subsist principially, a supposition impossible in itself, however, because these objects would then be a pure nothing, which could not exist at all, not even in illusory mode. There could be no return from the state of deep sleep to the states of dreaming and waking, since all formal manifestation would be irremediably destroyed for the being once it had entered deep sleep. But such a return is on the contrary always possible, and does in fact take place, at least for the being who is not actually delivered, that is to say, definitely freed from the conditions of individual existence. The word chit, unlike its previously mentioned derivative, chitta, must not be understood in the restricted sense of individual and formal thought. This restrictive determination, which implies a modification by reflection, being marked in the derivative by the suffix "pitta," which is the termination of the passive participle, but in the universal sense, as the total consciousness of the self looked at in relation with its unique object, which is Ananda, or beatitude. This object, while constituting in a certain sense an envelope of the self, Anandamaya Kosha, as we have already explained, is identical with the subject itself, which is Sat, or pure being, and is not really distinct from it, and is, as indeed it could not be, once there is no longer any real distinction. Notes 5 and 6. The state of deep sleep has been described as unconscious by certain Orientalists, who even seem tempted to identify it with the unconscious of German philosophers like Hartmann. This error doubtless arises from the fact that they are unable to conceive of any consciousness other than individual and psychological consciousness, but their opinion appears nonetheless inexplicable, for it is not easy to see how, with such an interpretation, they are able to understand such terms as chit, prajnana, and prajna. The terms subject and object, in the sense in which they are used here, cannot lead to any ambiguity. The subject is the knower, the object is the known, and their relationship is knowledge itself. Nevertheless, in modern philosophy, the sense of these terms, and especially of their derivatives, subjective and objective, has varied to such a point that they have been given almost diametrically opposed interpretations, and some philosophers have taken them indiscriminately to indicate markedly conflicting meanings. Besides, their use often gives rise to considerable inconvenience from the point of view of clarity, and generally speaking, it is advisable to avoid them as far as possible. Thus, these three, Sat, Chit, and Ananda, generally united as Satchitananda. Note 7. In Arabic we have, as equivalent of these three terms, intelligence, al-aqlu, the intelligent, al-aqil, and the intelligible, al-maqul. The first is universal consciousness, chit. The second is its subject, sat. And the third is its object, ananda. The three being but one in being, which knows itself by itself, are but one single and identical entity. And this one is Atma, considered outside and beyond all the particular conditions which determine each of its various states of manifestation. In this state, which is also sometimes called by the name samprasada or serenity, the intelligible light is seized directly, that is to say, by intellectual intuition, and no longer by reflection through the mental faculty, as occurs in the individual states. We have previously applied this expression, intellectual intuition, to buddhi, faculty of supra-rational and supra-individual knowledge, although already manifested. In this respect, therefore, buddhi must in a way be included in the state of prajna, which thus will comprise everything which is beyond individual existence. We have therefore to consider a new ternary group in being constituted by Purusha, Prakriti, and Buddhi, that is to say, by the two poles of manifestation, essence and substance, and by the first production of Prakriti under the influence of Purusha, this production being formless manifestation. Moreover, it must be added that the ternary group only represents what might be called the outwardness of being, and does not therefore coincide in any way with the other principial group we have just described, and which refers really to its inwardness. It would amount rather to a first particularization of being in distinctive mode. Note 9. It might be said, bearing in mind the reservations that we have made concerning the use of these words, that Purusha is the subjective pole of manifestation and Prakriti the objective pole. Buddhi then naturally corresponds to knowledge, which is as it were a resultant of the subject and object of their common act, to use the language of Aristotle. However, it is important to note that in the order of universal existence, it is Prakriti that conceives her productions under the actionless influence of Purusha, whereas in the order of individual existences, on the contrary, it is the subject that knows under the action of the object. The analogy is therefore inverted in this case as in those we have previously enumerated. Lastly, if intelligence is taken as inhering in the subject, although its actuality presupposes the presence of two complementary terms, one will be obliged to say that the universal intellect is essentially active, while the individual intelligence is passive, at least relatively so, even though it is also active at the same time in another respect, and this is moreover implied by its reflective character, which again is fully in agreement with Aristotle's theories. It goes without saying, of course, that in speaking here of outward and inward, we are using a purely analogical language, based upon a spatial symbolism which could not apply literally to pure being. Furthermore, the ternary group, Satchidananda, which is coextensive with being, is transposed again, in the order of formless manifestation, into the ternary group, distinguishable in Buddhi, of which we have already spoken. The Matsya Purana, which we then quoted, declares that in the universal, Mahat or Buddhi is Ishvara, and Prajna is also Ishvara, to whom the Karana Sharina properly belongs. It can also be said that the Trimurti, or triple manifestation, is only the outwardness of Ishvara in himself. The latter is independent of all manifestation, of which he is the principle, since he is being itself, and everything that is said of Ishvara, as well in himself as in relation to manifestation, can be said equally of Prajna, which is identified with him. Thus, apart from the special viewpoint of manifestation and of the various conditioned states which depend upon it within that manifestation, the intellect is not different from Atma, since the latter must be considered as knowing itself by itself, for there is then no longer any reality which is really distinct from it, everything being comprised within its own possibilities. And it is in that knowledge of the self the beatitude, strictly speaking, resides. This one, Prajna, is the Lord, Ishvara of all. Sarva, a term which here implies, in its universal extension, the aggregate of the three worlds, that is to say, of all the states of manifestation, comprised synthetically in their principle. This one is the Lord of all. He is omnipresent, since all is present to him in integral knowledge, and he knows directly all effects in the principial total cause, which is in no way distinct from him. He is the inward governor, Antaryami, who, residing at the very center of being, regulates and controls all faculties corresponding to the being's various states, while himself remaining actionless in the fullness of his principial activity. He is the source, yoni, matrix, or primordial root, at the same time as principle or first cause of all that exists under any mode whatever. He is the origin, prabhava, by his expression in the indefinite multitude of his possibilities, and the end, apiyaya, by his return into the unity of himself and the universality of being himself universal being. Notes 10 through 13. Effects subsist immanently in their cause, as has been said by the scholastic philosophers, and they are therefore constituents of its nature, since nothing can be found in the effects that was not to be found in the cause first of all. Thus the first cause, knowing itself, knows all effects by that very fact. That is to say, it knows all things in an absolutely direct and non-distinctive manner. This inward governor is identical with the universal ruler, referred to in the Taoist texts quoted in an earlier note. The Far Eastern tradition also says that the activity of heaven is actionless. According to its terminology, heaven, Tien, corresponds to Purusha, considered at the various levels that we have already indicated, and earth, Ti, to Prakriti. These terms are therefore not employed in the same sense that they must bear as constituent elements of the Hindu Tribhuvana. In the cosmic order, this can be applied to the phrase of outbreathing and inbreathing, occurring in respect of each cycle taken separately. But here it is the totality of cycles or states, constituting universal manifestation, that is referred to. Man and His Becoming, according to the Vedanta, by Rene Guenon. Read by Christopher Robert Neal Nation. Chapter 15. The Unconditioned State of Atma. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and that which is beyond. Such are the four states of Atma. The greatest is the fourth. In the first three, Brahma dwells with one of its feet. It has 3 feet in the last. Thus, the proportions previously established from one point of view are found reversed from another point of view. Of the 4 feet of Atma, the first three, when the states of Atma are considered distinctively, only have the importance of one from the metaphysical viewpoint. And from that same viewpoint, the last is three in itself. If Brahma were not without parts, it might be said that only a quarter of it is in being, including therewith universal manifestation, of which it is the principle, while its 3 other quarters are outside being. These 3 other quarters may be regarded in the following manner. One, the totality of the possibilities of manifestation, insofar as they are not manifested, subsisting therefore in an absolutely permanent and unconditioned state, like everything belonging to the fourth. Insofar as they are manifested, they belong to the first 2 states. As manifestable, they belong to the third state, principio in relation to the 2 former. 2. The totality of the possibilities of non-manifestation, of which, moreover, we only speak in the plural by analogy, for they are obviously beyond multiplicity and even beyond unity. 3. And lastly, the supreme principle of both, which is universal possibility, total, infinite, and absolute. Note 3. Similarly, when considering the first 3 states, which together constitute the realm of being, it could also be said that the first 2 amount to no more than a third of being, since they only contain formal manifestation, while the third state by itself amounts to 2/3, since it includes both formless manifestation and unmanifested being. It is essential to note that only possibilities of manifestation enter into the realm of being, even when considered in all its universality. The sages think that the fourth, Chaturtha, note 4, the two words Chaturtha and Turiya bear the same meaning and apply to the one identical state. Yad ve chaturtham tat turayam. Assuredly that which is chaturtha, that is turiya. The sages think that the fourth, which knows neither internal nor external objects, is a distinctive or analytical sense, nor the former and the latter taken together, regarded synthetically and in principle, and which is not even a synthetic whole or integral knowledge, being neither knowing nor not knowing, is invisible, adrishta, and indeed non-perceptible by any faculty at all, actionless in its changeless identity, incomprehensible since it comprehends all, indefinable since it is without any limit, unthinkable since it cannot be clothed in any form, indescribable since it cannot be qualified by any particular attribute or determination, the unique fundamental essence of the self, Atma present in all the states, without any trace of the development of manifestation, and consequently absolutely and totally free from the special conditions of any mode of existence whatever. Fullness of peace and beatitude, without duality. It is Atma, itself outside of and independently of any condition. Thus it must be known. It will be noticed that everything concerning this unconditioned state of Atma is expressed under a negative form. It is easy to understand why this must be so, since in language every direct affirmation is necessarily particular and determinate, the affirmation of something which excludes something else, and which thereby limits the object so affirmed. Note 6. It is for the same reason that this state is simply called the fourth, since it cannot be characterized in any way. May the fourth be with you. But this explanation, although quite plain, has escaped the Orientalists, and in this connection one can mention a curious example of their lack of understanding. Outremer imagined that this name, the fourth, showed that a logical construction only was intended, because it reminded him of the fourth dimension of the mathematicians. That is an unexpected comparison, to say the least, and it would certainly be difficult to justify it seriously. Every determination is a limitation, that is to say, a negation. Note 7. Spinoza himself has formally recognized this truth. Omnis determinatio negatio est. But it is hardly necessary to mention that his application of it is more reminiscent of the indetermination of Prakriti than that of Atma in its unconditioned state. Consequently, it is the negation of a determination which is a true affirmation, and the apparently negative terms which we find here are, in their real sense, preeminently affirmative. So also the word infinite, which has a similar form. expresses in reality the negation of all limit. It is therefore the equivalent of total and absolute affirmation, which comprises or embraces all particular affirmations, but which is not any one affirmation to the exclusion of others, precisely because it implies them all equally and non-distinctively. And it is in this manner that universal possibility contains absolutely all possibilities. Everything that can be expressed by means of an affirmative form belongs of necessity to the realm of being, since this is itself the first affirmation or the first determination, that from which all others proceed. Just as unity is the first of numbers, one, whence all others are derived. But here we are no longer in unity, but in non-duality. Or, in other words, we are beyond being, for the reason that we are beyond all determination, even principio. Note 8. Our point of view in the present instance is purely metaphysical, but it should be added that the same considerations can also apply from the theological point of view, although the latter ordinarily keeps within the limits of being. There are those who have recognized that negative theology alone is strictly valid, or in other words, that only attributes which are negative in form can properly be ascribed to God. For reference, St. Dionysius the Areopagite, treatise on mystical theology, the last two chapters of which resemble the text we have just quoted in a remarkable manner, even down to the expressions used. In itself, then, Atma is neither manifested nor unmanifested, at least when one regards the unmanifested as the immediate principle of the manifested, which refers to the state of prajna. But it is the principle both of the manifested and the unmanifested, although this supreme principle can also be said to be unmanifested in a higher sense, if only thereby to proclaim its absolute changelessness and the impossibility characterizing it by any positive attribution whatsoever. It, the supreme Brahma, with which unconditioned Atma is identical, the eye does not attain to, nor speech nor mind. Note 9. Similarly, the Quran says, in speaking of Allah, the eye cannot reach him. The principle is reached neither by sight nor hearing. Note 10. Here, the eye stands for the faculties of sensation and speech for the faculty of action. We have seen above that manas, by nature and function, participates in both alike. Brahma cannot be reached by any individual faculty. It cannot, like gross objects, be perceived by the senses, nor conceived by thought like subtle objects. It cannot be expressed in sensible mode by words, nor in ideal mode through mental images. We do not recognize it as comprehensible by aught other than itself, and it is for this reason that we do not know how to expound its nature by means of any sort of description. It is superior to what is known, distinctively, or superior to the manifested universe, and it is even beyond what is not known, distinctively, or beyond the unmanifested universe, one with pure being. Note 11. See for reference the passage already quoted from the Bhagavad Gita 15.18, according to which Paramatma transcends the destructible and even the indestructible. The destructible is the manifested, and the indestructible is the unmanifested, taken in the sense that we have just explained. Such is the teaching that we have received from the wise men of former times. It should be realized that that which is not manifested by speech, nor by anything else, but by which speech is manifested, as well as everything else, is Brahma in its infinity, and not what is looked upon as an object of meditation, as this, an individual being or a manifested world, according to the point of view according as the point of view refers to the microcosm or the macrocosm, or that Ishvara, our universal being itself, outside of all individualization and manifestation. Note 12. Kena Upanishad 1.3 through 5. What has been said of speech is then successively repeated in Shrutas 6 through 9, and in the self-same terms about the mental faculty. The eye, hearing, and lastly about the vital breath. Shankaracharya adds the following commentary to this passage. A disciple who has attentively followed the exposition of the nature of Brahma, a disciple who has attentively followed the exposition of the nature of Brahma, must be led to suppose that he knows Brahma perfectly, at least in theory, but in spite of his apparent justification for thinking so, this is nevertheless an erroneous opinion. In actual fact, the well-established meaning of every text concerning the Vedanta is that the self of every being who possesses knowledge is identical with Brahma, since through that very knowledge the supreme identity is realized. Now, a distinct and definite knowledge is possible in respect of everything capable of becoming an object of knowledge, but it is not possible in the case of that which cannot become such an object. That is Brahma, for it is the total knower, and the knower can know other things, encompassing them all within its infinite comprehension, which is identical with universal possibility, but cannot make itself the object of its own knowledge, for in its identity, which is not the result of any identification, one cannot even make the principial distinction, as in the condition of prajna, between a subject and an object, which are nevertheless the same, and it cannot cease to be itself all-knowing in order to become all-known, which would be another itself, in the same way that the fire can burn other things but cannot burn itself, its essential nature being indivisible, just as, analogically, Brahma is without duality. How could the total knower be known? Neither can it be said that Brahma is able to become an object of knowledge for anything other than itself, since outside itself there is nothing which can possess knowledge, all knowledge, even relative, being but a participation in absolute and supreme knowledge. Note 14. Here again, one can establish a comparison with the following phrase from the Treatise on Unity, Risalat al-Ahadiyya, of Muhyiddin ibn al-Arabi, There is nothing, absolutely nothing, that exists apart from Him, Allah, and He comprehends His own existence without, however, this comprehension existing in any manner whatsoever. Hence it is said in the succeeding passage of the text, if you think that you know Brahma well, what you know of its nature is in reality but little. For this reason, Brahma should be still more attentively considered by you. The reply is as follows. I do not think that I know it, but that I mean to say that I do not know it well, distinctively as I should know an object capable of being described or defined. Nevertheless, I know it according to the instruction I have received concerning its nature. Whoever among us understands the following words in their true meaning. I do not know it, and yet I know it. Verily, that man knows it. He who thinks that Brahma is not comprehended by any faculty, by him Brahma is comprehended. For by the knowledge of Brahma, he has become really and effectively identical with Brahma itself. But he who thinks that Brahma is comprehended by some sensible or mental faculty knows it not. Brahma, in itself, in its incommunicable essence, is unknown to those who know it, after the manner of some object of knowledge, but be it a particular being or universal being, and it is known to those who do not know it at all, as this or that. Note 15. Kena Upanishad 11.1 through 3. Here is an almost identical Taoist text. The Infinite said, I do not know the principle. This answer is profound. Inaction said, I know the principle. This answer is superficial. The Infinite was right in saying that it knew nothing about the essence of the principle. Inaction was able to say that it knew it as regards its essential, its external manifestations. Not to know it is to know it in its essence. To know it in its manifestations is not to know it as it really is. But how is one to understand this? That it is by not knowing it that it is known. This is the way, says the primordial state. The principle cannot be heard. That which is heard is not it. The principle cannot be seen. That which is seen is not it. The principle cannot be uttered. That which is uttered is not it. The principle, not being imaginable, cannot be described either. Whoever asks questions about the principle and answers them, both show that they do not know what the principle is. Concerning the principle, one can neither ask nor make answer what it is. Zhuangzi, Chapter 22. Father Veger's translation, page 397 through 399.